This is a Film Stories original podcast.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hi everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale and I'm over the moon this week to be joined by a colleague and someone I've read and admired for a long time, Mr. Zan Brooks.
Hello, John. Lovely to be here.
Zan, I've read your stuff and listened to your stuff. I remember listening to you and Jason Solomon's all the way back when you were the granddaddy of podcasts with Guardian Weekly, right?
Yeah, we were the sort of prehistory of it when the Guardian was first kind of dabbling in those sort of digital waters at a point where nobody really knew what they were doing. We were all kind of making it up as we went along. Apart from Jason. I mean, Jason sort of came to it with much more of a pedigree on the BBC. So I kind of, clung to Jason like a kind of life buoy in those waters. But it was a fun time. It was good. And the fact of nobody quite knowing what they were doing made it fun, I think.
Yeah, it was kind of, is it radio? Is it a distinct, discrete thing? Or, it was, I was always amazed at the access you got as well. You always got really top-class guests.
Yeah, I think that was the Guardian name. And also you could also say, oh, we just need 5 minutes with them, in a way that if you're doing a print interview, you wanted the full hour. So that kind of made it easier. But there was also this sort of strange position of all of these print journalists who'd gone into print journalism because they didn't want to go into broadcasting, suddenly being made to kind of go up to a mic or get behind, in front of a camera. And a lot of people really rebelled against that and really hated doing it. Whereas I think I kind of enjoyed it, and I kind of enjoyed the ineptitude of it.
Yeah, ultimately, I mean, to me, it always sounded like, like good mates having a chat. And I think I remember the first time I met you, I sort of said to you, "Oh, I was driving home from work. I would have a podcast on a Film Weekly. That was sort of one of my weekly regulars."
And it has a kind of weird tale as well. In that when I'm in Cannes, a couple of times, even now, people will sort of say, "Oh, I'm listening to the podcast." You think, but it hasn't existed for like 10 years. And in their mind, I think it's still sort of going on as a weekly event.
Were they going back into the archive and picking it up?
I think they were being nice.
Right.
And they were sort of saying, "I'm a regular listener." And you think, no, you're not, because it doesn't exist and hasn't for 10 years.
So what we're going to talk about today is, and we're going to sort of relate this to your film writing and your career generally, but we're going to talk about a sort of second strand of your career, which you've picked up recently. I think you might well have been, excavating away in the mines unseen as a novelist, and this is your second novel that you've come out with, The Catchers, and it's a story. Well, I'll let you describe the story because I don't want to be because you wrote the book. So why don't you give us a sort of intro to the novel?
Yeah, The Catchers is set in the mid 1920s, and it's a tale of the song catchers, who are the kind of the first record scouts, really. And it was at the time when recording equipment was suddenly portable, that you could actually take it out into the field and make field recordings. And so the song catchers came from the big cities, Chicago and New York, and they went down mainly through Appalachia, through the mountains, in search of rural American music. There was this sense that there was this gold mine, really, or these sort of oil fields of music that could be unlocked. And sold to the big cities, but also sold back to the countryside, back to sometimes the people who were making that music. And it felt like a kind of good old school adventure story. I mean, almost in that kind of archetypal way of an old knight's quest, where the knight leaves the castle, goes into the wilderness and gets the treasure and comes back and enriches the castle with that treasure. But in a more complicated way, as is the way that these stories sort of often are, where as you get older, you realize that, what is this wilderness? People are living out in this wilderness, and what is this treasure? Maybe it's something that they own, and you're actually kind of stealing it from them. So it felt like it had this whole layer of interest in terms of what is exploitation, what is cultural appropriation, all of these kind of modern resonances, as well as being just a sort of a fascinating bit of lost American history.
I mean, that was an interesting point, actually, that the idea of sort of commercialism, because the most immediate examples of this kind of behavior that spring to mind are sort of the more noble, if you like, academic ones of like anthropologists out in the field. And we've even had a recent film with Paul Mescal and Joseph O'Connor, sort of, what's it called? History of Sound, I think.
Yes.
Is one of the, or Folkback Mountain, as I remember someone termed it recently in Cannes.
I haven't seen that. That's not bad.
Yeah, that's it. I think I should give credit to that. I'm not sure if it was Tim Roby or Guy Lodge. It was
Right,
one of our colleagues who came up with that. But there's a sense that they're going out and they're doing this, but not for an exploitation, not for cultural appropriation, but more for preserving the culture.
Yes.
And your team of catchers are cheating people out of profits, essentially.
Yeah, which I think is more more what happened. It wasn't an altruistic endeavor at all. It was American capital. This was a resource that they thought that they could get very, very cheaply from ignorant people who weren't au fait with the laws of the city, or really a business that almost wasn't a business by this point. It had only just started up. Nobody really to give the catchers a bit of leeway here. There was this sense that probably this business was a flash in the pan anyway, that it wouldn't really survive 18 months, so you might be able to make a bit of money off of it. It's only now that we look back on it and think, if you look back on the American century, what we think of as the American century, and you can see that pretty much everything that was connected with that, whether it was jazz or Dixieland or Elvis or Motown, all started with those kind of rackety catchers going into the mountains back in the mid 1920s. So it's almost like the sort of the big bang of popular culture, in a way that no one could have predicted that. But the issues that came out of that are obviously all still with us today. It goes right through to the debate about Spotify, where people are earning a penny for every 1,000 streams or whatever, whereas other people are making millions off the back of the artists.
Or indeed, you'll know this as a writer, Jeff Bezos in Amazon. You'd much prefer your book to be bought in a bookshop where the profits might be divided more equitably than for Amazon, where they take a hell of a chunk.
Yeah, it's what we give value to, and what kind of value we give to it. And I remember there was a great book that I read years ago called "Our Band Could Be Your Life" by Michael Azerrad, and it was about it was like looking at about 6 or 7 cult American indie bands from the 1980s, and these were all bands that I grew up I grew up loving, and I grew up loving them, and I guess assuming as a sort of a kid in small town England that these people were, they weren't living Michael Jackson lifestyles, but they would have been doing all right because they had a following. I'd read about them in Melody Maker, and me and my mates all loved them. And you read this book and you think, oh yeah, they were on food stamps at the time. They were making do with giving guitar lessons. That they weren't making any money at all. I can't play music, I can't write music, but I see it as kind of magic. So I still have that assumption that if you can do something like that, you're going to be all right. You're going to have a nice house, and people are going to love you, and you're going to have food on the table. Often that's not the case, and it wasn't back in the 1920s, and it sure as hell isn't now.
Yeah, I had exactly that same thing. I thought, oh, if your record has got to Barrow in Furness, you must be living high on the hog. You can't have, you can't do that. What about the idea that the same is true of writers as well. I always think if you have a book in the bookshop or W.H. Smith's, you must be, riding around and throwing yachts at each other. But it's just not the case, I'm afraid. I'm afraid to say. I wish it was.
Yeah.
In terms of, just to get a little bit to the detail of the book as well, I really loved the beginning where you sort of, I hope this isn't too much of a spoiler, but there's a slight wrong footing takes place as to the character you think you might be going with when you sort of introduce someone and you think, this is a lead character, and then turns out not to be.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where you stand on spoilers, but I'm sick of that whole conversation. I think spoil away, and also it's the first couple of chapters, so there's no way that it's a spoiler. Yeah, I think that the first chapter perhaps is a bit of a misdirection. That it begins with three catchers who are kind of waylaid on the road halfway down to the mountains because of the spring storms that are going on. Two of them are established. One of them is a rookie, and I think that you are led to believe that one of them, these experienced catchers, is going to be the hero of the book. And he is then sort of removed from the story very, very quickly and violently. And it's actually the rookie that we follow. I'm not quite sure why I did that, but I suspect it might have something to do. I'm kind of interpreting my own work a bit here. But I think one of the themes of the book is that you don't really know what lands and what doesn't. The catching itself is seen as a bit of a kind of, it's a fishing trip. It's a grope in the dark. In the same way that we don't know what films are going to do well or are going to kind of crash and burn or just disappear for good. So I think I wanted to establish that sort of haphazard nature of it quite early on, that randomness, that sense that there is no such thing as an obvious hit or an obvious masterpiece. All these things are elastic. All these things are up for grabs. The person that you think you might be banking on might turn out to be a total loser, and the person that you're overlooking might be the one who kind of stays the course.
Yeah, yeah. That in that sense, it has a lot of analogies with the film industry. And I was also thinking about sort of going into the Appalachian Mountains and sort of heading for Hollywood when Hollywood was not a thing. When they sort of shifted there for tax reasons and to avoid Edison. It's a similar. I mean, if you read Henry James and Edith Wharton, everybody's looking back across the ocean to England as a centre of culture and everything.
Then they were, and they were with this music as well, because there's this terrible sort of contradiction and paradox that almost pulls this music apart, but also gives it its kind of friction and its life, maybe. Whereas what they're looking for is pure blood American music, and yet that pure blood American music is obviously imported. It's a melange of stuff because it's an immigrant nation. So it's got Italian folk, Irish folk, it's got Yiddish kind of threaded through it. And crucially, if you look back at the history of those early recordings, how they were being marketed was as old time music. And the catchers would put adverts in the papers, the local papers for musicians, that would be calling for musicians who can play the old time staples, the old time, So there was this sort of terrible nostalgia in the way that this music was framed, even though the reality of it was that it was very urgent and strange and new and raw, which of course, as people become more comfortable with that, becomes the way that it's marketed, and that's becomes how popular music is marketed. It's the latest thing, it's the sound that you never heard before. But back at the start, there was this terror of that. So then they're trying to make it comforting and soothing.
It sort of happens in the opposite direction when you get rock and roll, that first wave of rock and roll, and then the Beatles show up, and to some degree Elvis Presley prior to them, and suddenly all that first wave, like Chuck Berry, are being called golden oldies, and they're all saying, hang on a minute, we've only been around 5 years, we're not like we're in our 30s, we're not.
Yeah. But this, I mean, again, this is America, isn't it? This is the speed at which things move, which was another thing that I was interested in trying to sort of tackle a little bit with the book. Again, talking about spoilers, there's a bit at the end where you're suddenly aware of how much things have moved on, even in the time that the adventure has played out, or even the second half of the adventure has played out, that the turnaround on these things is a furious, accelerated rate. I always think of the Robert Crumb cartoon, which is I think in like sort of 6 panels or something, where it's the prairie and then it's the railroad going through the prairie in the second panel, and then it's the gas station, and then it's the skyscrapers. It's just the sense of it all springing up and then perhaps collapsing back into kind of dirt and prairie again by the end.
Yeah, or Dire Straits Telegraph Road.
Yeah, there's your English reference there.
Talking about, like, I mean, Dire Straits is a fairly good example of this. That sort of English approach to America. You're an English. Have you got family in the States, or are you?
Yeah, my dad lived over there. My dad moved over there, and my dad he died a couple of years ago. But my dad lived just outside New York. It was, it was a place that I would go to a lot as a kid to see him. I studied over there. I've lived over there briefly. I've kind of worked there a lot. So it's somewhere that I feel, or rather I felt, a real affinity with. And then when I came to write this book, I kind of realized the depth of my ignorance. That I felt like a tourist. And then I realized that I was going to have to do a lot more research than I thought I could get away with. And failing that, I was going to have to lean in a little bit to that kind of outsider status. So the main character, John Coughlin, is an Irish immigrant to New York, and he's very much the tourist going through this world that he doesn't understand. Which was sort of very much my experience in writing the book, in that if there's an area of New York that I feel comfortable, if the area of America I feel comfortable in, it is New York, up to a point. Everywhere else, I'm slightly feeling my way through that a bit. So therefore, that has to become what the book and the story is about to a degree, I think. And also this is a sort of charged issue now in a way that it never used to be. It used to be that you had an artistic license to write about anything you wanted and anywhere you wanted and any people or race or gender or whatever that you wanted to write about. Whereas now the presumption is that what was artistic license becomes a kind of form of trespass. So the way around that, the kind of neat way around that, is to write a book about trespass, to write a book about whose story is this, whose music is this, who is this person coming into this world and stealing.
Yeah, I kind of was thinking, good move there, because it's analogous. Obviously, that you've got the catcher, and you're catching a culture as well. And I suppose the most delicate part of that is going to be race, in terms of you can write a period novel, you can write a novel that's geographically different to yours, but you're right. I grew up reading things like Shogun, and you would never think twice about that. And then American Dirt came out, and suddenly there was. I mean, I think it's.
I interviewed Danny Boyle a couple of weeks ago, and I asked him if he could make Slumdog Millionaire now, which Slumdog Millionaire is, in terms of his CV, is his big hit. That was what he won the Oscar for.
Yeah.
And he's saying that no, you couldn't do that. What was that? That's 15, 16 years ago. But now the idea of a white middle-aged man going to Mumbai and shooting the local scenes there would be incredibly problematic. I'm not sure whether that's good or bad. I go both ways on this. I think that art is an empathy machine, and you should be encouraged to step out of your comfort zone and stretch and try. And if you fall flat on your face, then fine, but give it a go. But there's definitely an awareness that you've got to be much more rigorous and careful than you could in the past.
I mean, personally, I would think that one particular example would be a nonsense, because India has a thriving film industry. So it's hardly as if Indian directors lack opportunity to, you're taking a job from somebody else. So it's, I was thinking about this recently in terms of trans issues, just to put the cat amongst the pigeon.
This is the third rail of the discussion.
Exactly. I mean, ultimately, nobody wants to touch this, but if a woman is playing a trans woman, would that be problematic? Because if we're saying trans women are women, then women are trans women as well.
Yeah, but then you're right down the rabbit hole, and I
Yeah.
don't see an easy way out. We're gonna. How long have you got? We're gonna be 5 hours on this.
Yeah, no, we're going to get off it really quickly. I can feel the tingling of the electricity coming up my arm. So
Well,
I'm going to.
I mean, the weird thing is that I think it's just changing under us all the time. My first novel was set in 1920s Britain, and it was written in the third person, but the main character and the kind of almost our de facto narrator through it all was a 14-year-old girl. So I was effectively writing from the point of view of a 14-year-old girl, and that didn't bother me. It didn't trouble me in the slightest. This book has like a couple of portions where your main governing sensibility is this teenage black kid called Moss Evans. And that I tied myself in knots over that in terms of can I get away with doing this? Um, so I don't know whether race is more tricky than sex, or whether the climate has changed in the 5 years between writing the first book and the second, that everybody's just watching themselves and policing themselves a lot more carefully.
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who's written, I mean, I've got one novel published. I've written several unpublished things.
So about Peterloo, right?
Yeah, Blood is
Yeah.
on the Grass, and that's sort of like a multi-character. So I write it from the point of view of lots of different
Right.
characters. That gives you an out as well. But I tend to write as women quite frequently, almost as a default. They tend to be more interesting characters a lot of the time. I don't mean that in a
Mm.
condescending way, but they tend to have certain obstacles already in their
Yes,
way, and that makes the
definitely so.
drama.
Yes, they are more in the teeth of a drama, naturally in the teeth of the drama, than a male character. There's a sort of heightened sense of jeopardy. There's a lack of agency, but at the same time, there's the freedom that being slightly on the periphery can give them. So they do naturally lend themselves to drama more easily, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Um, one thing I was thinking in terms of your success, and I do think it's successful in getting that. I didn't read it and you hit those clangers where you go, oh, geez, no one would say that. And for me, it's more acronyms. It's
Mhm.
more something that sounds too modern. Like in a period drama on television, someone will walk in and say, "Give us the room," and you just think
Yeah.
that nobody has said that outside of a TV drama, and they certainly weren't saying in the 1930s or Rome in the time of the Caesars. um, did you sort of give it to readers? I mean this not necessarily even in terms of race, but even just in terms of America, getting that American and regional voice. Did you give it to readers and say, "Can you just check this out and make sure everything sounds okay"?
I didn't, and I probably should. I actually a friend of my dad's read it and mailed me, and he said that he's a genuine American. He said that there were two errors. I'm trying to remember what they were. One was, I remember this. There's one fleeting reference to radio where I say wireless, which is wrong. And another one was, oh, I called somebody gets called a chancer, which is a sort of apparently a British slang term that wouldn't have been used in America ever, let alone in the 1920s. So there are a couple of very small errors in there. Um, but overall, I'll take that. I'm happy with that. That's okay.
Two's okay. Two's
Two's
okay.
okay.
I had a friend of mine, American friend of mine, say, we don't say brilliant in America,
Mm.
and I was like, oh, okay, okay,
Yeah,
that's something to
but
pay
what I
attention
would say is that although I'm saying that I felt that it was a stretch kind of getting into the voice and getting into that world, maybe not as much as it might otherwise have been, because this is sort of the culturally this has been the water well, I mean probably you as well, that we've been swimming in for 50 years. This is America. My degree was in American studies. I read American fiction. I watch predominantly American movies. So it it's sort of the language I know, at least through art, as much as I know, West Country Britain or London.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I've never been to Cornwall, and I have been to Texas, so
Yeah.
I probably would feel more lost writing a short story set in Cornwall than I would in
I think you
Texas, for
probably would,
instance.
yeah, yeah. And that was this was a tricky part of the book, was because you research what 1920s New York was like, and then you think, yeah, but that's just one little tiny bit of the book, because then he's now in 20s Virginia, and now he's in 20s Tennessee and 20s Mississippi, and at a point where these communities were very, very isolated. They were their own little self-sustaining planets. So you then have to almost begin the research again. So in terms of all of that, it was it was a much harder book to kind of nail down than I was anticipating, as I kind of breezily set off to write it.
But you need that. You need that at the beginning so you can freewheel a little
Yeah, I
bit
think you
before
probably
you.
do a bit. Otherwise, you'd never begin anything.
Exactly, exactly. So I saw like on social media and stuff, you were sort of going to these places and researching them. Aforementioned trip to Texas. I found and I totally share with you love of American literature, love of American novels, and I would go into like restaurants and diners and order stuff that I'd read about, but I didn't know actually what it was, like grits. And you'd
Yes, of
like, what
course.
is grits? Polenta, apparently.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I did a trip down, and it was incredibly useful, but perhaps not useful in the way that I was anticipating. That I did the drive from New York right down to Mississippi. I kind of, set up some things in advance, and people were very, very helpful. But what I also thought was that I would get a great sense of Mississippi in the 1920s, that I would go into these little towns and I would take lots of pictures and make lots of notes of the street layouts and the buildings and all of this stuff. And what you realize is how impermanent these places are, that you would come into each town and they'd be the big sort of strip mall outside and the chain motels and the friendlies and the McDonald's and stuff like that. And you think, I'm coming into a sort of fairly sizable, civilized place. And then you get to the place and it would just be like literally tumbleweed. There'd be like nothing there. And you realize that it doesn't exist in the same way that it did. And after my initial sort of disappointment and dismay about this, I then kind of thought maybe that's a part of the book as well. The part of the book as well is the fact that this quick turnaround, is the fact that things are moving and changing under your feet all the time. And that is the American experience to a degree. So it helped with the sort of tone and the texture and the flavor of the book, the research trip, if not necessarily the actual kind of specific historical details.
It is funny that as you say, that the architecture of the town is different to what it is in Europe. In
Mm.
Europe, you sort of head in and there's a piazza or there's a square or there's a market square or something like that.
Yeah.
And in many
And it's
towns,
probably unchanged in the last 100 years, really. There,
yeah,
there might be, some new frontage on the building and, stuff like that, but not much beyond that.
you'll often find in say a British street that the bottom half of the ground level will all be new, but if you look up at the
Yeah,
second story, it goes back to the 1920s and
yeah,
1930s.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, in America, I was just sort of surprised. You'd be your GPS would be saying, you have arrived at your destination, and you'd be thinking it's just a street. Where's the town?
Yeah,
Where am I?
yeah,
So that whole compass has to change.
yeah. And remember staying. I went to Greenville, which is one of the main locations of the book, and I checked into the sort of the motel on the outskirts of Greenville. And as I arrived there, there were all people kind of, sitting out on the veranda, and there was a kid throwing basketballs at the hoop. And I thought, this is great. This is like a kind of, this is a nice little community here. And then I realized that it literally was the community, that I was the only actual person who was legitimately staying there. That this was basically had become a welfare hotel. The, the,
Oh,
the
right.
property there was
Like a
so
Florida
extreme.
project, sort of.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Right.
The level of poverty is kind of shocking, and that is from the position where of incredible wealth. 150 years ago, the Gilded Age or Reconstruction, where it was the gentleman planter and the black sharecroppers, and it was an incredibly polarized environment, but full of massive, massive wealth that is now all gone. I think it is the poorest state in the Union, Mississippi.
Yeah, and I mean, that's where I was also seeing lots and lots of. I mean, you can't help but make comparisons with contemporary America. You have a flood, for instance, and we're seeing disasters killing people even in New Jersey a
Yeah.
couple of weeks ago. So you're having environmental disasters. You're very. I think the book is very good on kind of there was a bit where I was thinking, wait a minute, but slavery no longer exists. Why are they being, called like runaways, for instance?
Mhm.
And yet, obviously, this is the era of Jim Crow. This is an era in which the freedom of black people in these places extremely limited.
Yeah, there were the vagrancy laws which basically kept people in place. So although technically they weren't slaves, they were bound to wherever they were working. They had to shop from the company store. Every aspect of their life was curtailed. You had the book sort of spotlights the 1927 Mississippi flood, which was like the biggest natural disaster in America at the time. I think it was something like, I mean, thousands, 20, something like 20,000 square miles flooded. Um, the whole society sort of jeopardized. And therefore, what happened then was there was this panic among the white establishment that said the only way we can keep hold of this society, we can keep it upright, is to cling on to the underclass. So therefore, the vagrancy laws were very, very heavily enforced to keep black labor in place, to rebuild. And this was the time of the Great Migration of black workers to the northern cities. But this was fought tooth and nail by officials and sheriff's offices and in the South, because they knew, and they were right, that once that underpinning had gone, the whole edifice would start to collapse, which is now what has happened, I think.
Do you do you think that I mean the thing is it's looking at all the problems you're talking about. I'm just thinking that's going to get worse, that's going to get worse, that's going to get worse. The people that you talk about in that motel that you went and saw, and you said
Yeah.
there's incredible poverty, and those welfare checks that they might have been surviving on, they're kind of going to be gone very soon.
Yeah, it's really terrifying. But it's reached the point where it's terrifying all over.
Mm,
I don't see. There's the sort of the magical thinking of Trump's election and the people who voted for him, as a magic bullet, as a I don't know what. I mean, you can unpick the motivations of that again for as long as we can talk about trans. But at some point, there's got to be a reckoning. At some point, the things that he is promising that will make everything right don't come through. And then where those people go and what happens to those communities, I dread to think. It's
mm.
not good. And we're getting off topic here, but when Trump was elected last year, I had this very it's a very depressing night all around. But I had this very strong feeling that okay, now we're on that path. There's now no going back, and this leads to a reckoning that ends in a. I mean, it ends with violence, and that's almost inevitable now.
Yeah, Alex
And I think that there was
Garland.
a bit of a sense of that too back in the 20s. There was a sense that this ornate, intricately constructed Jim Crow world of the gentleman's South had run its course, and it was going to come down one way or the other, whether sort of violently or not.
Yeah, Alex Garland is beginning to look more like a documentary filmmaker
Yeah,
every
yeah,
every
he wishes.
every Children of Men as well. I was
Children of Men for sure. Yeah.
that's one that I'm hawking around a pitch for a book of that at the moment, and that just seems every day to be more and more
It's
relevant.
one of Don DeLillo's favorite films, Children of Men.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. And again, you can see why it very much sort of dovetails with his interests.
Great minds think alike,
Mm.
Sam. Me and Don. We're often texting about books. Uh, let's move to one side for a moment, and I want to know generally sort of how you got into writing novels, because I feel a great deal of empathy with this, because I kind of started writing novels when I was 14, 15,
Mm.
and then yeah, enough about me. What about you?
I always was a voracious reader, but I was also, I think, a voracious writer. I think I wrote loads of sort of, bad stories through childhood.
Poetry? Any poetry?
No, never poetry. I mean, I like poetry. I love poetry, but I've always had this sort of the slight self-consciousness, I think, about writing it. So I've never really tried,
Well
but
done.
definitely stories. And then that actually extended through college, where part of the course the degree course was a sort of prototype kind of fiction writing element strand to it. So I did a lot of it then, and was loving it, and then the kind of cliche of the being sort of sidetracked, I guess, and journalism came along, and if if you like if you like writing, but crucially you like getting paid, and meeting people and going places and researching stuff and meeting people that you wouldn't normally speak to, and journalism has a hell of a lot to recommend it.
Mm.
So I'm very resistant of the idea, the kind of cliche that journalism is a sort of lesser form of writing. I don't think that's necessarily true at all. And I love journalism and love journalism and spent many, many happy years doing it exclusively. But what that inevitably meant was that the fiction writing took very much a backseat, to the point where there were years and years where I didn't dabble in it at all. Um, I was on staff at The Guardian for 15 years. 14 years of that were incredibly happy and exciting. The last one was grim. And in the end, I left. And luckily, because nobody else really does leave, people stick around there. Uh, I could maintain, relationships with editors and people that I did work with for 15 years, most of whom are still there. So I can earn a freelance living writing for The Guardian. But what that meant was that I was no longer in the office and suddenly had that little bit of extra free time. And really just, it was like the cliche of landlocked ducks, I suppose, where you suddenly sort of dump them in a pond. It felt like this wonderful moment of freedom. Like the first 3 months after leaving The Guardian, I just sat and wrote pretty much half of my first novel in that time, and did the sort of deep, full immersion where I lived and breathed it and didn't think of anything else, and it was wonderful.
Let's get we haven't said the title of your first novel yet, so
No,
that
because the title is fiendishly long. It's called "The Clocks in This House All Tell Different Times," which I still love. There was obviously a lot of pushback on it. Publishers were like, no, you can't do this. You can't have a title that's long and weird. But I stuck with it, and I'm really glad that I did. And it was prompted by a really unpleasant story that my dad told me about his aunt, my great aunt, who'd recently died, where he said that when she was a girl, she had just told him this quite shortly before she died, and I don't think he had the sense she hadn't told anybody else. And it was like a sort of 3-minute conversation. But she said that when she was a girl, she had been taken into Epping Forest to meet, in her words, the funny men from the war. So there was obviously this kind of awful dark bit of sort of sex trafficking with disabled soldiers, ex-soldiers from what was the First World War. Um, and it struck me in many ways as a horrific story, but it also struck me as almost the kind of perfect modern day representation of a dark fairy tale where the girl goes into the woods and meets the monsters. But this is all in the real world. Um, so just from that tiny bit of information, I wrote this book very, very quickly. Shopped it around a few places and got kind of pushbacks, and then it was luckily taken on by Salt, independent publisher in Britain, and ended up doing kind of well. So it was the best experience I could have wished for without having, as we've discussed earlier, without having loads of money from it.
Excellent, excellent. And Salt, to go back to poetry, I think they're a big poetry publisher, if I
Yes, they
remember
started
correctly.
as a big poetry publisher, then they moved into fiction. I think they're sort of increasingly moving into genre fiction, which they previously were just doing pure literary fiction. But I think they're also circling back a little bit to poetry now too. So they're kind of an eclectic bunch, Salt. Considering that it's literally almost a sort of mom and pop store. It's Jen and Chris running it out their front room, but they're incredibly knowledgeable and passionate, and they really kind of get behind their books. And for me, it was a really uncomplicatedly kind of wonderful experience working with them.
Excellent, excellent. And I mean, both these books as well, they sort of have that literary like literary pedigree, if you like, that you can see they're coming into literary landscapes, as you say, the sort of dark gothic fairy tale. It makes me think of Angela Carter as well. And then you have this sort of this southern set, again, quite gothic tale with floods and houses of strange people, from Mark Twain to William Faulkner and on. But what are your filmic? Are there filmic influences that seep in, or how does that? Because I mean, having been the Guardian film critic for a long period, you must have, or writing about film for a long period, I should say, you must have such a knowledge of films, just sort of almost by osmosis. It must come out sometimes.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. I tend to think visually. A lot of the reviews, possibly prompted by pedigree writing about films, they tend to say, this reads very filmically. This would make a good film. And I always have the sense that there's a slight double-edged kind of, it's a double-edged compliment that.
Yeah.
Um, they're
This would make a
almost,
good Netflix series, is the new
yes,
one.
that it's not quite high literature, perhaps, which I would dispute. I think it is, but even if it's not, I resent the idea of seeing film as lesser in any way. I have I have friends. I have a friend who's like a very successful literary fiction novelist, and he, will pride himself. He'll read, the Fitzcarraldo and works in translation and incredibly kind of esoteric literary taste. But he prides himself on the fact that, he likes, Dana Carvey movies and he's very lowbrow with film. And I think, I haven't actually ever had this sort of out with him properly. I think he thinks that this makes him much more down to earth. I think this makes him incredibly snobbish, because what he's basically saying is, I don't want to waste time with that kind of art house stuff in film, because art house in film is trash, really, because film is a trash medium. It's not. I tend to think very visually. I think that visual storytelling is at least as sophisticated and strange and haunting and layered as straight literary storytelling. I think it's a combination of watching films or journalism, show don't tell. I try to shy away from, I guess, long interior monologues that sort of explain and unpick the motivations of the characters. I tend to gravitate more to scenes that hopefully do that for me in the way that a good film will do. So I think the first book as well was written in the present tense. So there was this idea of the kind of camera traveling through this world in the moment. So I think that film definitely percolates through my work, whether there's actual literal specific film references there, I'm not sure, but I bet there are. I
Mm.
bet there are. With this last book, I remember I remember having, we're really back on spoiler territory here. I had this very long ending to this book that wasn't quite working. And I couldn't work out what to do with it. And I remember watching in Venice, Paul Thomas Anderson's The Master. It was the first time anyone had seen it. It was the press screening of The Master, which I loved. And I remember watching it and adoring it and never wanting it to end. And there comes a point where the Joaquin Phoenix character is on a motorbike in the salt flats in the desert, and he rides off, and Philip Seymour Hoffman is shouting after him, and he won't come back. And I remember sitting in the cinema and thinking, they're going to end it here, and that's going to be awful because I want it to go on and on and on. But it would also be an amazing point to end it, to just crash end
Yeah.
it there with him running off. That's the end. He's off on his journey. Bang, that's America. There's no resolution. You just keep going. And of course, they don't end it there. It goes on for another kind of 40 minutes and it's fine. But I rewatched it when I was struggling with this ending, and I had the same feeling again. I thought, actually, I would have been quite happy if they had ended it there. And that gave me the courage, I guess, to basically do a sort of similar crash ending with the Catchers, which again, as with the sense of impermanence and randomness, I think tallies with a lot of the elements of the book, and the idea as well that the recording equipment is so primitive that you've got to record everything in 3 minutes. You haven't got time to hang around. You only have time to explode, I think, is the old. I can't remember who said it. It was one of the Imagist poets. It might have even been like Ezra Pound or somebody like that. You only have time to explode. There's this idea that it's the Richard Linklater line from Waking Life. The ongoing wow is happening right now. And so I like the idea of just that sudden ending, just when you're thinking now we're going to have the sort of the nice explanatory finale. You deny people that.
There's a very underrated Miles Teller film called The Spectacular Now, which
I've never seen it.
oh, it's a superb film. It's by a director. I think he's called James Pilfold or something. He's a director who seems to specialize in films about drinking addiction. Because he did one with Mary Elizabeth.
Mr. Antonio.
James Ponsoldt, he's called.
Oh yes, James Ponson. Yes,
Mary
I've
Elizabeth Winstead.
Mary Elizabeth Winstead. Yes, okay.
And he did one, I think it was called Smashed, and it was her and the guy from Breaking Bad, Jesse from Breaking Bad.
Aaron Paul.
That's right, Aaron Paul. And they were just basically a couple who were drunk all the time, and she was a teacher. And she makes up a lie because she vomits in class, and she says, "Oh, I'm pregnant," as a way of covering the fact that she's hungover, and then so she has to sort of carry on the lie for a while until she's found out and shamed.
Yeah.
And it's brilliant. But Spectacular Now is similarly, it's about this like good. It's very the thing that I love about these films are the very non-judgmental views of drinking. You know, it's like these people obviously have problems and they're obviously gonna pay for them at some point, but it's not really up to us to judge.
Well, non-judgmental is another double-edged compliment, I think, that reviewers of both these books have used. I think people traditionally, from what I've found, like they like kind of clear moral guardrails, I think. And possibly, I can understand that. It's a messy, confusing world. But I feel that the films and books that I like don't really give those, and possibly I don't quite have the confidence to give them myself. Particularly if you're dealing with something like the early days of recorded music, where you are liberating this music from its little pockets. You're bringing it to the world. That has a huge beneficial effect. I think by and large that's a good thing, but it's also not uncomplicatedly a good thing. It's not 100% a good thing because it's dirty. It's exploitative. So to have a book that picks a lane and says this was a good thing or this was a terrible thing, I think would be to misrepresent the whole interesting kind of mess and muddle of it all anyway.
You're literally in murky waters throughout the book.
Yeah, well, again, this is where the flood sort of comes in. The idea of this this well that breaks its borders and goes everywhere, in good ways and bad. I think that's the story of the 20th century, isn't it? Really?
Mm, yeah, it's both liberating but terrifying. And, I'm
Yeah,
not sure if it's the Arabic sort of insult or the Chinese. It gets attributed to both cultures, but that may you live in interesting times,
yeah,
that sort of curse.
yeah.
Um, uh, I think it was used the other day by Stephen Colbert when he was interviewing Joaquin Phoenix, where he said, "You never want to be in great television. It's something you enjoy watching, but when you're in the moment," he was using the idea of Joaquin Phoenix being on David Letterman. That was great television, but you don't want to actually be on that side of the camera when it happens.
Of course, but surely on some level as well, you've got the flickering excitement, and you're already throwing yourself forward to afterwards, and you could look back. I know, I mean, you must know this as well. I know this from journalism when I've had horrible interviews where you've been sitting there just thinking, I want to, and my main instinct always is I want to run out the room. But what you're really wanting to do is throw yourself forward half an hour where you've got it all on tape.
Yeah.
And now it's yours to kind of write up and sift through, and then it becomes its own thing. It becomes the creative thing as opposed to the horrible moment.
Yeah, absolutely, and pour, yeah, and sort of edit it to your satisfaction, so it doesn't make you look like an embarrassing fool. You never say, "I was blushing throughout this." What was your worst interview?
Oh, I've done so many. My God. Faye Dunaway,
Oh, well,
John.
she's famously
Yes, yes,
edgy,
she is.
isn't
I
she?
kind of knew that, but it still took me aback. John Goodman was just miserable and horrible. Yeah, so many really.
John Goodman, I wouldn't have pegged him as what was the monosyllabic or
Monosyllabic. Everything was, I don't know, sir. Yes, sir. I don't know, sir. No, sir. It was like that.
right?
And then I asked about his alcoholism, and then he kind of erupted. So yeah, that was a car crash. Awful interview.
Oh my God. And not even, I mean, when you're getting that, you're also, when you're throwing yourself forward half an hour, you're also thinking, I'm not going to have anything I can use.
No, I almost didn't. And then you're almost writing it up sort of verbatim. You're writing your lengthy, spluttering questions, and then his no, sir.
Yeah.
Because what else have you got?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I've never had a real car crash interview. I don't think I've had people be a little bit. Sean Harris was a bit aggressive, but I
Oh
think
yeah.
he is with everybody.
Okay.
I've heard that from other. I think he's got form. I think it's. I mean, it
Right.
sort of struck me as aggressive in the way that was nervous more than malignant. It was just like it wasn't aggressive to me. It was aggressive to the process.
Yes, I've had that. I had that with Chris Penn. The late Chris Penn was like that. He was and he was aggressive and a little bit scary,
Mm,
but I sort of felt that it was coming from a position of kind of deep flailing insecurity as well, which
right.
which which you kind of you can we can all relate to that.
Yeah, yeah, and it's kind of in a way manageable because I kind of know how to maneuver around that. I know how to calm it a little bit because I know how I feel when I'm feeling like that.
Mm.
The other one that was kind of quite bolshy, but in an entertaining way, was Abel Ferrara. Because I don't think you've even been a film journalist, until Abel Ferrara has said to you, "Don't bust my balls." I mean, I don't think
Yeah.
you're allowed to interview him without him telling you to not bust his balls at some point or
Yeah,
another.
I interviewed him in a bar in Cannes late at night one time, and then he was trying to get me to go to a strip club afterwards. So it was very much a kind of an Abe Ferrara style interview. And again, kind of wonderful in the moment where you think most interviews you're just sitting in a sterile hotel room and you've got 20 minutes with somebody. Here you've got like the full circus, the full Ferrara circus going on around you.
I heard from someone that he was doing interviews in London for The Bad Lieutenant, where he's going around in a limo. and they were just jumping in and out. He was picking up journalists, and they were jumping in, and he'd have a full array of substances that he was taking
It's
during
like
the
a
interview.
film in itself.
I know, I know. I mean, it's yeah, and now he's sort of sober and making films about Padre Pio. So
Yes.
I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah.
sure. Well, I mean, pretty nuts films to be fair. He's not making sort
Oh
of
yeah, he's great. I kind of yeah, I love even the sort of the quiet, strange ones.
yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. He's well worth. He's always well worth a watch. Although I get him confused. There's another film director who I always get Abel Ferrara confused with. I always find myself mixing up their canon. I can't quite remember who it is
Who?
now. I'm not sure.
Right.
It's got to be another New York director, hasn't it? But who is it? Come back to me. Sorry, it's not
Yeah.
Jim Jarmusch though. Jim Jarmusch is too distinct.
Hmm.
But it's that sort of, there is a little bit of crossover between Jim Jarmusch and him and Hal Hartley. They all sort of exist in a similar. I used to go to this cinema in Liverpool called the 051, and it was named after the telephone code at the time for phoning Liverpool, and it was like under a multi-story car park, and the train lines ran under it as well, and it would shake a little bit like Brad Pitt and Gwyneth Paltrow's apartment in Seven. And
Yeah.
I'd watched so many films there that sort of all the films I've seen there kind of become 051
Because they're
films.
all part of that same aesthetic.
Exactly, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I had the same thing. I studied in Manchester, so and it was the days before they bulldozed and blew up Hume Crescents, which were the big kind of brutalist 60s blocks, and they had the cinema there called the Arban. And the Arban was always deserted. It was always scary as hell to kind of get to. And there was a woman who was probably younger than me, working both the till and the concession stand with a pram, um, and the baby in the pram.
I'm glad you said a baby in the pram because that was my next question. What was in the pram?
Yeah, just baby in the pram that she would be, just looking after while she was running this whole cinema. But they would show just all the great kind of, 80s, early 90s kind of indie films. It was fabulous.
Yeah, I saw all the Greenaway films, all the Derek Jarman
Yeah,
films, and then they would show retrospectives or,
yeah,
suddenly Clockwork Orange would show up and
yes,
they could only show it if you signed like it was a private club or something.
yeah, yeah.
Nuts, absolutely nuts. And now they've got a very slick sort of arty cinema in Liverpool, which is probably better, but I kind of miss that charm. I miss
Oh,
that.
seems the grindhouse days of Liverpool.
Absolutely. So what are the plans? How's freelancing treating you? Have you got another novel that you're already mapping out? What's next?
Freelance ticks along. I'm always aware that I should not take it for granted that anyone who's freelance will know that all it will take is like two editors to die, and that's my career kind of over.
Yeah.
That you've got your foot on two sort of stones in the rushing stream, I suppose. But for the time being, it's okay. I am. After doing the catches, I really wanted to do something completely different. I wanted to do something much smaller. So I'm working on a third novel that I'm about 3, 4 chapters into, which is modern day and basically just kind of two characters in a house. And this has sort of got definite this has definitely got kind of film touchstone references as a sort of film mood board, more so than The Catchers or The Clocks in This House did. So the sort of the touchstones for this one, I would say, are like Frank Perry's The Swimmer, Joseph Losey's The Serpent, and maybe Rogan Camel's Performance a bit. So those are the kind of the three films that are sort of in the back of my mind, even though the actual story has nothing that relates to those at all.
But yeah, I think it's really interesting having that sort of mood board. I often sort of will be playing music when I'm writing something fictional,
Can
and
you do that? I'd love to be able to do that. And I've tried and I just can't. It kind of,
okay, it's very, very functional. It's not like I play music to appreciate music. I have music as a way in. So I'll
right.
often put a playlist together and it will be like I'll put it on and it will take me back into the mode that I was in
Okay,
when I
yes.
was last right. So it won't be like I'm listening to anything. I'm no, I've got these 15 songs that last an hour and a half. Not songs, sorry, instrumental tracks.
Yeah.
Can't have anything with words in it.
Instrumentals I can just about do,
Yeah.
but as soon as you've got lyrics in there, that's me bashed out of any kind of deep focus.
No, I can't do lyrics, and usually it won't be all the time. You know, it won't be if I'm, especially if I'm writing all day, I will have I will use it to sort of get in like first thing in the morning, just after lunch, that sort of thing. So to
Yeah,
re-enter the world,
yeah.
it serves as a useful sort of key. And then you never listen to that playlist ever again because
Okay.
you've just
Yes, that
listened to it to death.
yeah, that makes sense.
So "Kill My Darlings" has a different meaning to me.
Yeah.
Well, Zan, listen, I'll be. There's one last question, sorry, which is a sort of traditional question, and I'm just going to drop this on you. Have you got any film books you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
Oh, John, this is you've saved the worst question to right to the end.
Yeah.
I
Or the best
or the
question.
best, but no, the one that makes me look the worst. So I'm reading that as the worst question. Um, no, because I tend not to read them. I think I read so many for so long that I I saw you recently posting the Roger Lewis Peter Sellers biography, which is an absolute classic. I mean, obviously, I've read the Taylor Burton one. That was probably the last film book that I actually read. Erotic Vagrancy, was it?
That's right,
Um,
yeah.
but the Peter Life and Death of Peter Sellers, I think, is just one of one of the great uh, biographies. I read recently the Chinatown book, the book
Sam
on
Watson,
yes,
it's not the
yes, and I
long
think that was
goodbye,
very
it's like
good.
the
I
big
thought that was
goodbye.
yes, that's right. I like that a lot. So I'll say that. But I'm aware that I've got very little, I'm bringing very few cards to the table here. I probably read about two or three a year.
Mm, mm.
But I'll say the Chinatown book.
Yeah, I talked to both Sam Watson. He's just recently done one on Coppola, which is a really interesting.
Is that good?
It is good. He's definitely on the inside. He's
Yeah.
definitely
You know what?
in the
Because they
camp.
sent that to me. They sent that to me in that way of like, do you want to review this? And generally speaking, I try and steer clear. I do some sort of fiction reviewing, but try to steer clear of film books as much as possible. And I read like the first chapter, and in the end, I said I don't want to review it because it felt, this is based on very much the first chapter and a skim read of the first chapter. It felt like it was worshipping at the altar of the great man. It felt like now we are talking about you just of course he's a great man. Let's take that as read, and now let's try something a bit different here. But maybe I'll go back to it. I've got it kicking around somewhere.
I think it's worth. I think he does sort of find the clay feet, and
Okay.
think there's especially the thing I was surprised about most was the fact that his family come out of it quite badly, like his mother and father and things like that. Because the thing you assume about Coppola is that
Oh yeah.
he's this big family guy, so you assume he has this. It's a bit like, again, I maybe mixing him up with Martin Scorsese, that you think of Martin Scorsese's mum and dad being in all his films and everything.
Yeah.
And you think of
No, I don't
Coppola,
think. I think Coppola has trotted out that line himself. I think he's
yeah.
tried to foster that image that it was this very, big, supportive, warm, loving Italian family.
Yeah, and Watson's book is like, no, he was quite,
Yeah.
the mother didn't really say she loved him, or, everybody
Oh,
was
okay.
withholding love, and there was quite a lot of that. And I think similarly to Scorsese, he had ill health as a child. So there are all these
Yeah.
kids who basically were kept indoors for extraordinary amounts of time and didn't have,
Typically, second generation immigrant stock in a polluted city. I mean,
yeah.
that's the wellspring for art, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I'm always surprised at Californian punk bands. It's like you guys can go outside. In New York and Detroit, I get it. In Barren Furnace, I get it. But you
Yeah,
guys can go
explain the
outside.
Minutemen. How did the Minutemen happen?
Exactly. Manchester Joy Division makes
Of
perfect
course.
sense.
Yeah.
You know, brilliant. Thank you so much, Zan, for talking to me.
It's been a real pleasure.
That was wonderful. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, John. See you in Venice.